Hi, everyone. Welcome to the last Hudson Valley thinning meeting. We have Terrence Robinson and Dan Donahue here with us. Who's going to be starting off?
I think Terrence probably wants to lead off, Sarah.
Okay.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be back for the last time on thinning this year. And I hope that maybe some of you are done. But on the chance that maybe some of you are not done, I'd like to just spend a little time, it'll be a shorter meeting than others, talking about what to do if things didn't work as we had hoped and you still have way too much fruit on the tree. There is one last opportunity when fruits are 16 millimeters up to 20 with decreasing sensitivity as you go from 16 to 20. So the earlier you are in that window, the better. But there's still this opportunity, which really is this week, to put on additional spray if you needed. Now, we have talked that the last week was a period of time with warm temperatures, and we should have gotten great thinning. And so I had hoped that all of you would be done, that nobody in the Hudson Valley would still need to thin. But I now would like to just summarize a little bit that there appears to be a very good set in the Hudson Valley. I think it's better than Western New York. There's a lot fewer kings in the Western New York crop than in Hudson Valley. Now, if you remember, the petal fall sprays went on under very cool conditions with a carbohydrate surplus, and we predicted, and I think it bore out, that they gave very mild thinning. I have seen some data from some growers that measured fruit size that basically showed that over that period of time of bloom and petal fall, they knocked the fruit numbers down from, let's say, 1,000 that you might start with down into the 300 or 400 range. But 300 or 400 is still many more than you want for the crop on many of these tall spindle trees. And so we expected that the 10 to 13 millimeter spray, which went on last week, under very warm conditions would result in great thinning and finish the job. Now, the results are still a little unclear to me. And I think with a couple more days and more data, we should be able to make a decision on whether or not we still need more thinning. This is where I'd like to call on Dan to give us his view and his data and anything else he cares to share about how far we've come towards the target. So I'll stop sharing, Dan, and you can talk.
Okay, very good. I won't be sharing my screen. We just finished another set of measurements just moments ago, so I'm just going to give you numbers. For the Pink Lady plot, we talked about the Pink Lady last week. It looks like we made some progress. We had a target of 120 per tree, and we had the estimated 253 fruit set last week, and now we're at 202. So that was a move in the right direction, although not nearly enough. The average of the 15 largest fruits were 16.28 millimeters, and the average of all fruitlets were at 12.23. And if I could call on Anthony Fino, who's the grower, whose plots we used, if he could just tell us what his application plan was this year.
No bloom thinner. Petal fall, we have 5 parts, which we call 6 ounces an acre of NAA and a quart of carbaryl. And then we came back middle of last week, Wednesday, with our 10 to 13 millimeter timing of 3 quarts to the acre of Maxell and a quart of carbaryl.
Okay, so this measure, we calculated out, we took measurements today in prep for this meeting, but actually we're at about 80 degree days since that last application. So we're a little bit early. And I think what we're going to have to do is come back in Wednesday and take another sample. But I'll talk about that more as we move into the gala next. So the gala went in the opposite direction. Last week looked like we were making excellent progress. We had 183 fruits predicted to be on the tree on a target of 120. Today we're estimating 314. So basically it's indicating an improving set. The largest 15 fruitlets were 15.9 millimeters, and the average of all fruitlets measured were 11.7. So I think this illustrates what I've seen up and down the valley today. And that is with Gala, a strong set, a good king set, but the laterals are very, very strong. So if the kings were running in the 14, 15 millimeter range, a lot of laterals, 10, 11, 12 millimeters that look very strong. So the impression I have is that we just don't know if those laterals are going to hang on or not. And we'll definitely have to remeasure in 2 days and see what might happen with those. But at this point, for Galas, consistently up and down the valley, very, very strong set. And there's absolutely, in my opinion, more thinning that needs to be done. Looking at the Honeycrisp, we have a Honeycrisp plot, and it showed the same trend as the Gala. And frankly, I'm having trouble believing the data. Visually, the trees are a smaller tree. Remember, I think our target was 50 fruits per tree. We were at about 94, 95 estimated last week, and now we're up over 100. But the trees don't look, they look very well thinned. I dare say over thinned? Probably not, but well thinned. So I'm having trouble believing the data at this point. And this is a case of, again, data that we took about an hour ago and haven't really had a chance to go through in detail in case we made any errors. So not sure what's going on there. But in general, Honeycrisp in the valley, it's a good set. They're not quite as loaded up as the Gala, but still most blocks I saw do require additional thinning. I really only saw one block in my travels today, an Empire block, that I would leave alone. It was down to singles and doubles. And we know that Empires were a little bit squirrely this year, and we had some, concerns with the bloom and the set. But overall, that was the only block that I had seen in the whole journey today. Really consistently, things are strong. Unless something happens in the next 2 days to indicate otherwise, I think there's additional thinning to do out there. And Wednesday is supposed to be another hot day, assuming the wind stays down and the rain stays away. So at that point, that's my report. Once I have the numbers on Wednesday, I'll get them out immediately and maybe we'll learn a little bit more.
Dan, I may have missed it, but did you say what the size of the Honeycrisp were, the biggest Honeycrisp and the mean?
Actually, I didn't. Hey, Sarah, you got that number?
Yeah, I'll pull it up right now. The mean of the 15 largest fruits is 15.9 millimeters, and the mean of all of the fruits is 11.2 millimeters.
Thanks, Terrence. Okay, Terrence, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, thanks for that help, Dan. Dan and I were talking about this particular dilemma that we're in and decided to go ahead with the meeting today. But in many cases, we still don't know the full results of the 10 millimeter spray. Where we've seen some thinning by early measurements at the 80-degree days instead of the 120, we'll probably see a little more thinning evident once we get closer to the normal time to take the second measurements. I know that a number of growers are measuring fruits and their second measurements won't happen for a couple of days. And so I would just want to put this caution there right now that we need a few more days and better data to make the decision on rescue sprays. However, I do believe the eyes of people, Dan and others, that are just seeing way too heavy of a fruit set on Gala. So let's focus on that one for a little while because it probably was a variety that's going to need another spray. So when we think about this next opportunity, we generally try to target between 300 and 350 degree days. Anytime the fruits are 16 to 20, but we often just call it the 18 millimeter spray. I will say that as you go from 16 to 18 to 20, the sensitivity of the fruits declines with every millimeter they get bigger. So if you're got data and you're already confident you know what happened at the 10 to 12 millimeter spray, then the sooner you can spray again, the better. The problem that I worry about is that is still maybe thinning going on from the 10 to 12 millimeter spray, and then we jump the gun and spray when we maybe didn't need to. But I put a lot of confidence in what people are seeing, and they're seeing just too much fruit on the galas. With that sort of introduction, let's look at where we're at and what we can expect over the next several days. So this is a chart. I only ran one, and it's Milton, and just showing when full bloom was in late to April. The petal fall window for thinning started about the 8th or 9th of May and finished about the 12th. It went on in the Hudson Valley under cool conditions and a massive carbohydrate surplus, and I expected little thinning from that. I've been pleasantly surprised with the data I've seen from at least one grower on several blocks that it did give some decent thinning. We got part way there. And as Dan mentioned last week, his measurements showed that we had gotten fairly decent results from that by upping the rate a little bit. As we talked last week, we entered this window for the 10 to 13 millimeter spray sometime around the 19th, but because it was so warm, the window was very short. It was just 3 days. Now, some people didn't get it on the 19th or the 20th or the 21st. Some people went on the 22nd, 23rd, 24th, whatever. But if you put it on last week under the warm conditions, we had deficits that were not huge, minus 25 up to about minus 12, but that deficit was really helpful. What really surprised me is how cool it turned, and then the deficits disappear and we start to get surplus. So this is the worst of all worlds. The fruit's now getting big and we don't have any deficit to help us. And so I'm predicting that this window, which starts at 300 degree days, will start on about May 25th, which is on tomorrow. And it will continue for basically the rest of the week because of cool conditions. Now, even though tomorrow's in the 70s, it's supposed to be, but that day after tomorrow is 80, and then Thursday is 80. Those 2 warm days with relatively warm nights do help us. But if we combine that with cool days after and relatively cool days before, on the 24th today, it all adds up to deficits that are not that great and kind of poor thinning conditions. One warm day does not give us thinning. We have to piece together 2 or more warm days to get thinning. We will apparently piece them together. Therefore, it seems to me that if we're confident we need another spray, tomorrow or Wednesday is the day to do that. By waiting until Thursday, then you look forward and there's only cool temperatures. No nighttime temperatures that were decent to help give us that thinning. And the daily carbohydrate status is positive 20 grams. So even though I draw the window relatively wide from tomorrow, May 25th, all the way through the end of the week, I really think the window is narrower, the optimum window, and that is spray on the 26th, which is Wednesday, is the best timing if you can work it in and around rain. Now, because we're at a large fruit size, the recommendation is going to be to increase chemical rates substantially to get thinning. even if you're going to add oil, like I'm going to suggest in a minute. The dilemma and the problem is people won't know the answer from their fruit growth measurements in time for tomorrow. But if you are waiting until Thursday to measure fruits, I would say move it up. Measure your fruits on Tuesday afternoon so you can then spray Wednesday if you want to. Because it looks to me like Wednesday is pretty much the best moment in terms of carbohydrates, because it's a warm day, predicted to be 86, and it's followed by at least one other warm day. And that I think will give us some thinning. So broadly from degree days, the best timing starts tomorrow and goes all the way to Sunday. But practically those cool days on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday mean that we should try to spray Tuesday or Wednesday. However, I would like to see the data from that 10 millimeter spray because it went on under warm conditions, and I'm expecting a lot more thinning than what it seems like we're getting so far. And so I'd really like to see measurements taken tomorrow or early Wednesday before deciding to go out and spray again on Wednesday. Unfortunately, the temperatures are going to be only in the 70s, and the carbohydrate balance is only going to be 0 or positive. This will give mild thinning. This is going to require that you add oil to your spray mix, at least 1 pint of oil per 100 gallons to improve penetration of either Maxell probably or NA and uptake into the physiological activity in the leaf. 2 points that I want you to take away from this presentation. When we get to 18 millimeters, the thinning efficacy of all chemicals is reduced, but it's especially reduced for NA. The plant just develops a tolerance to NA. Once you're above 18 millimeters, it's like drinking water. It doesn't do anything. Hence, when we get to large fruit sizes, we've more focused on Maxell, which still seems to have some effectiveness at 18 millimeters. The second point is that the carbohydrate model is telling us it's not a helpful carbohydrate situation. There's no deficit to help us get decent thinning. So what are our options? One option is just 7 in oil, and that has worked well, and we might try that. But one that's worked the best for us when we've compared 7 in oil, Maxell 7 in oil, NA 7 in oil, the one that's worked the best is Maxell 7 in oil. And that's because if you use NAA at this timing, the fruits become rapidly insensitive to it after 16 millimeters. If you spray when the king fruits are 18 and some of the smaller fruits are 14, we're hoping that those smaller fruits are still sensitive and they can be taken off. But any fruit that's bigger than 16 millimeters is not going to be affected by NAA. My suggestion for the varieties where I think there's the biggest problem would be Gala, and that would be to use Maxell, the base rate at 64 ounces. Now earlier, I think it was Anthony said that on an acre basis, he put 3 quarts to the acre. This rate is higher. It's much closer to 4 quarts a gallon to the acre when you have 200-gallon tree row volume trees, and a pint of oil and a pint of carbaryl. Now for Honeycrisp, I just keep hoping that they've thinned well and we won't need this spray. But if you're confident that your Honeycrisp need more, I like to use Maxell. Previous to this, on Honeycrisp, we've used only NAA at petal fall, and then NA and 7 at petal fall and at the 10 millimeter. But because NAA loses its effectiveness, Maxell is about the only thing you can use. If you're really heavy with Honeycrisp, what works well for me is 48 ounces. It's a lower rate than the Gala rate. So in this case, instead of being a gallon, this would be the 3 quart per acre instead of the gallon per acre. Again, with carbaryl and oil. Fuji is another one that I think could benefit from another spray, assuming that they haven't thinned well enough so far, but it requires the same high rate as Gala, almost a gallon. Golden Delicious is a 4th one that I put on this list because it also requires a high rate of Maxell to get any thinning. Now for thinning, that's all I want to say for the moment, and I'd be happy to continue in the questions. I do want to put on paper this idea of spraying ethereal early for repeat bloom, because we are now entering the window in the Hudson Valley for the first sprays for varieties that are strongly biennial. I want to distinguish here between varieties that are mildly biennial. Those are Golden Delicious, McCowan, maybe some others, Jonagold. We could typically manage those with our standard recommendations for summer return bloom sprays, either ethereal at 1 pint per 100 or NAA at 10 parts, 4 sequential sprays spaced 10 days apart, beginning at about the longest day of the year for Western New York, but normally around June 10th for the Hudson Valley. So I'm sticking with that for those other varieties. However, with Honeycrisp and Fuji, it just hasn't seemed to work as well. And we think we understand better why, based upon the timing study that Pollyanna did with flower initiation, that Honeycrisp and Fuji start their flower initiation much earlier. And so we have to start return bloom sprays earlier. So I'm this year sticking my neck way out and suggesting that we start when fruits are 16 millimeters and spray at 10-day intervals 4 sprays of ethereal. Now, we know ethereal is a thinner. It's a potentially strong thinner if temperatures are above 80 degrees. If they're below that, then it can be very mild. And as with all chemical thinners, rate is the big factor. And so what I'm suggesting is a relatively low rate of ethereal, starting at 16 millimeters. And then 10 days later, when you'll be about 23 or 4 millimeters, and then 10 days after that, when you'll be at 30 millimeters, and then 10 days after that. But the first 2 sprays, to just be cautious with rate. I'm suggesting a 1/2 pint per 100. That essentially equates to 1 pint to the acre for 200-gallon trees. The second 2 sprays after the fruits are bigger than 25 millimeters. So let's just walk you through this. If we start at 16 millimeters, they'll grow about 7 to 8 millimeters in a week. So the second spray will be when they're, say, 23 or 4 millimeters. But the third spray will be when they're 30 plus, and then we can handle a higher rate of ethifon. So the last 2 sprays would be the equivalent of the normal rate, 1 pint per 100 or 2 pints to the acre. I also think it's beneficial to get all of those ethereal sprays done before the end of June. And I think it's very doable in the Hudson Valley. We're still in the last few days of May for the first spray, and then we'll put them every 10 days. We'll be done before the 1st of July. But to follow those ethereal sprays with 2 more sprays of 10 parts per million NAA, just put it in your cover sprays in the first 2 sprays of July. Just get a little bit additional flower bud initiation on these hard to repeat bloom varieties. I've agreed to write a short article on this to come out in the Eastern New York newsletter next week. It'll be a little better presented in more detail than this, but I wanted to throw this in on this meeting because it's the last thinning meeting, and because we're right now at the moment to put in some ethereal. So let's think about how this might work. If you're spraying a rescue spray on Wednesday of this week, or maybe even Tuesday tomorrow, I would suggest you put a 1/2 pint per 100 of ethereal in that thinning spray. So let's suppose you're spraying what I suggested, Maxell, 7, and oil. This low dose of ethereal will, I think, not cause additional thinning, but it will help. Now, I would prefer that this ethereal go on in a separate cover spray with just fungicides or insecticides, not in a thinning spray. So that would be my first suggestion, but that requires more trips through the orchard. And so if you want to combine it, I think it will be okay, because temperatures are going to be cool after the application. If this was a year with high temperatures through the rest of the week, I would be a little more cautious and say put it on as a separate spray. So I think with that, maybe that's generated some confusion, or we'll have some discussion. Let me just finish with the two more suggestions. At this timing, we typically almost always have thinned the bottom enough. And so I prefer that you completely shut off nozzles and only spray the top half of the tree. There will be some chemical that drifts down or that hits the tree from the other row, but it's best if you don't spray the bottom at this timing. And then because of the low sensitivity of the fruits to thinners at this timing, I think a surfactant penetrant is essential. And I like this 1 pint of oil. This is a very low rate of oil compared to what we use in blossom thinning. And I want to emphasize that that's 2 gallons at blossom time. And this is, you know, 1/8 of a gallon. So it's way, way less. So with those 2 little recommendations, let me stop. Thank you for your attention, and let's open it up for comments or questions.
Terrence, I just want to jump in for a second with a comment for the group about fungicide use. You know, what we're recommending here includes oil. Most of the growers that I'm running into wanted to switch to a Captan program at this time, and of course, oil and Captan are problematic. So I put a call into Carrick Cox, and we had a nice chat this afternoon. Carrick recommends, if you've maxed out on your EBDCs, so it's their Manzate or Zyram is not an option, then it's okay to leave Captan out of the mix, go against our usual recommendation of always having protectant in with your single site inhibitor type fungicides, and substitute a pre-pack, something like Maravon is an option, Luna Sensation, even Inspire Super. And don't worry about the protectant for this spray. That way you avoid the potential phytotoxicity problem of Captan, and one spray is not going to lead you to a resistance problem. So I just want to pass that word on from Carrick.
Yeah, that's a great comment, and I appreciate that, Dan. I had hoped we wouldn't be eating this, and then we would never deal with oil. You could go straight to your Captain, but it appears that we are not done thinning yet. I see a question in the chat box. Can Regulate be used instead of oil? We've been using Captan and covered. Yes, it doesn't work as well. Regulate is a surfactant, where oil not only is a surfactant, but it's a penetrant. So it's a very inferior substitute, but it will help better than doing nothing. Real problem with the Captan programs. And so if you've already been spraying Captan, I would say put Regulate in, hope for the best. But as we think about futures, I think we've got to keep that in mind, that if we do need these rescue sprays, we have to think through the Captan issue early in this process and try to leave it out just on the outside chance that we'll have this problem. Now, I'm really anxious to see the data over the next couple of days from various people that are measuring, because maybe we've already got the thing we need. So the question also Jennifer asks, is the rescue thinning more dangerous than the 10 to 12 millimeter? No. The bad part is it's not as effective. That means it's less dangerous. So when we did the 16-year study and we sprayed every year on all kinds of years at 18 millimeters, we never got over thinning. So it's kind of the same as the pedal fall spray. On the good side, it's very safe. And so you don't worry too much about over thinning. But on the bad side is that you sometimes don't get the thinning you wish you had. Now, the big difference between this spray and the pedal fall is that the pedal fall, you can always say, well, I'll get it next time. Maybe it won't work so well right now, but I'll fix it at the 10 millimeter stage. But at the 18 millimeter stage, there's no next time. This is your last shot. And so conditions are cool and it doesn't work very well, you just end up with a big hand thinning job. But it is safe.
Hi, Terrence. This is Jenny. Is the ethyl dangerous? I thought I had heard that before.
It is dangerous if temperatures are high, above 80s. So we have these 2 days, 26th and 7th, I can't remember, I have to go back and look at the chart, that are predicted to be 81 and 83. So the ethyl could be a challenge in those 2 days because it does react very quickly when it takes, because it's converted to ethylene. And so high temperatures make more ethylene. So if you're going to spray ethyl, I would like to avoid those 2 days and spray it after those 2 warm days.
Terrence, we have another chat question. Do you have a recommendation on a rescue spray on Empires?
Well, Empire works really well with this Maxell 7 in oil. That's where we did many, many years of work before we started focusing more on Gala, and it works really well. The rate, oh, maybe that's what they're asking. The rate of Maxell that I like is the 48 ounce per 100 or 96 ounces to the acre, which is the 3/4 to the acre rate of Maxell. Gala is one of the few that we use the higher rate for rescue thinning.
Terrence, where we did a measurement a little bit on the early side for degree days, should we just keep adding measurements to the same block, or do we need to start a new block?
No, just keep adding measurements. In fact, that's the great thing about the fruit growth rate model. Even if you measured 2 days ago, you can measure again and you'll still get really good data. Now, sometimes I'll just delete the early measurement and have it calculate basically from the first measurement to the later one. That gives you the best results. But even if you don't do that, it still gives you the right answer.
Okay, thank you. And I saw when I looked at the data, I saw some letters marking some of the measurements, like the letter O and the letter E. Is that something to be concerned about?
So did you output the data from the MaluSim? Did you download the data?
I just went in and pressed the export button so
Yeah.
that because I had to make a correction, and I was afraid I would mess it up, and so I exported it first to make sure that I could save it, and then I noticed those letters.
I'm glad you brought that up. That's our fancy error protocols. So what happens behind the curtain is the data when you put it in, if we detect an error, we don't use it in the calculation, we just throw it out. But we keep it so that if you download the data, it's still there, but we tag it so you can see what we thought was an error. The errors are 2 types. One is where the absolute growth rate exceeds 1.5 millimeters per day. So after many, many years, we can sometimes in the best conditions get 1 millimeter a day. But if you're reporting 1.5 millimeters a day, it's an error. So it flags it and doesn't use it. The other one is that when we compare the 15 fastest growing fruits, we do a little statistical test on it. And if the fastest one is more than 2 standard deviations away from the mean of those fastest, then we think it's an error and we flag it and we don't use it. Those are the 2 most common errors I find when I review growers' data. One, that fruit that seems like it's growing 3 millimeters a day when it's impossible, it's just measured wrong. And the other one is when you look at the fastest 15, there's 1 or 2 that are way high compared to all the other 15. And it seems like those somehow are an error. Sometimes I can figure it out, sometimes I can't. But in this case, we're deleting those because they're more than 2 standard deviations away from the mean of the fastest 15. Now, that was just a long, quick answer, but what you see is the results of our error detection.
Okay, thank you. And that the model is already taking into account sorting the fruitlets to put within a cluster to compare the same fruitlet, right?
Yes, the model does all the sorting for you. You can measure them in whichever order you want within the cluster, but we'll sort them and we'll match up the biggest with the biggest and so forth and so on.
Okay, thanks, Terrence. It's been pretty interesting. We just don't know if those early measurements, if those are going to continue to thin.
So when do you take your next measurement?
Well, we thought we might do some of the same blocks again tomorrow to see if we should expect a difference.
When were they measured the previous time?
They
Yes.
were measured on the 7th. No, they were sprayed on the 17th and measured on the 20th and then again today. So they were very close on degree days.
Yeah. So if you measured today and you're going to measure again tomorrow, I think you'll get pretty much the same answer. But if there's 2 days difference between the measurements, then you can get the better answer. So today's Monday. You can measure some tomorrow again if you want, but I'd say Wednesday would be the better timing.
Okay, thank you.
Well, Dan, I really appreciate your observations and your eyes seeing what's going on there. I hate not being able to see it myself. But if we really are looking at way too many galas, then I hope people will take advantage of tomorrow or the next day or even Thursday to get a final spray on.
I just want to make a comment. The faculty at Cornell have been almost under a complete lockdown for the past year with very restricted travel. So we really looking forward to Terrence coming, being here next year. But this year it's just an impossibility. The college is really. I was out delivering samples out in Geneva last week, and I wasn't even allowed to enter Barton Laboratory. So just to, keep they're operating under a really strict set of rules right now. But, okay, and with that, we appreciate Terrence being with us now for the third time, and I'm going to remeasure the pheno blocks first thing on Wednesday morning. I think I just need to give it a little bit more time to develop. But Sarah and I will get the numbers out. It'll be quick and dirty. It's not going to be pretty grass, but we'll get them out in an e-alert then about mid-morning on Wednesday. Hopefully you'll find that helpful in making, thinning decisions here in the next couple of days.
Terrence and Dan, this is Joel. I had a quick question before you closed up. I was wondering, what do you feel like the threshold is to go put out a rescue spray? If you're 25% over your target, 50% over your target, 2 times your target, where do you kind of draw the line in terms of, the efficacy versus how far over your target you are?
That's a great question. And I have sort of a rule of thumb, but it's just my own opinion. So let's assume that somewhere your target, just to make the math easy, 100 fruits on the tree, on a tall spindle tree. If I'm more than 50 fruits or 50% over that, I think it's worth a spray, especially if I'm double. If I have 200 fruits still on that tree, I want to spray again. But if I'm lower than 150, I don't think the risk outweighs the benefit, or the benefit outweighs the risk. I think you just fix that with hand thinning. And it's a question each grower can answer for themselves based upon how much time they're going to spend hand thinning. If you calculate out the costs and how it's going to work, maybe thinning on platforms or not, if you have to thin off 50 fruits on a tree, I think that's doable. But if you have to thin off 100 or 150 fruits, then it's just not realistic. You've got to thin again chemically while you can. So my threshold, 50% more than my target. Now, other people are more aggressive. I've said it many years now. It's like playing the card game 21. You have 18 in your hand, you take one more card, the odds are you're probably not going to win. But if you only have 12 in your hand, then you take another card. So each person decides, and my number is 50%, Joel.
Thank you, Terrence. Do we have any other questions? Okay, if not, I would like to thank Terrence for joining us, and thanks to our group. I definitely appreciate all the questions here today. And keep watching the e-alerts for future updates. We'll get our information out as quickly as we can. And with that, thank you and have a good evening.
Bye.